is it not true that some verses resonate in the memory banks? Sometimes when one comes across a verse, it brings back past moments and therefore past graces. It just happens that we have had a verse here which always resonates in the memory banks for me, because we had this sung when we were singing the cycle of the life of this great prophet. You may or may not know that something happened in the bubonic plague which changed the face of Europe in its prayer life. It was the fact that monasteries and convents were decimated in a short period of time, and they had to recalculate. It had an impact which remained to this day. Concretely, they could no longer, in most monasteries in the Western world, maintain the full sung repertoire of the Divine Office, notably in the night hours, the midnight office. The only order that resisted was the one of which it is said, never reformed because never deformed, the Carthusian order. So to this day they are the only ones who have maintained intact the full sung, notice sung, repertoire of the ancient prayer of the Church in its fullness. And therefore, when it came to this particular cycle, the cycle of the prophet, we had all the ancient repertoire still sung at that period of the year in the dark, deep hours of the night. And this particular verse that we have just read was very spectacular. It used to go more or less as the text itself goes, and you had this cry of the disciple and soul friend of the departing giant. Elijah is going in a very mysterious way, in a fiery way, a mystical way, to the clouds of glory, leaving behind his disciple with a double portion. And this cry comes from the heart of Elisha. And we had it sung, going up and up and up and up into the melody of the ancient Gregorian chant, which hit the high ceiling of the massive church and came down with echoes of the distant past, but also with, as it were, a reproduction of what happened. Pater mi, curus Israel et auriga eus. My father, and up we were going to massive melody, which we were able to perform because we had 4 grand chanters, and wow, it was almost a tearjerker. One almost saw Elijah going and disappearing, and the other one crying after him, don't leave me behind. In today's reading we have a shortened version for pastoral reasons, because it's actually quite dramatic before it gets to that point. And I was very moved on another level when we had to study this verse by verse and actually word by word at university. It was for this simple reason that they gave us, who were doing Hebrew, in the early stages, the Book of Kings to study, 2 of them, because it was fairly straightforward. It was prose and not the difficult Hebrew of the Psalms, which is far more complex. And so, when it came to looking at each verse, we had this drama unfolding. Before we get to that, we have what's going on as they get to the Jordan. There's a succession of events. First of all, the great prophet is being warned by the other prophets of the school of prophets that something's going to happen. And then also we have this. Elijah is trying to tell Elisha to stay put. He's only going to the Jordan. And each time, and it comes each time, by the Lord and so on, by the life of the Lord as the Lord lives, I will never leave you. And it's very moving in the actual simple muscular Hebrew. It's just word for word probably what actually was going on. They were inseparable. And the strong language of bringing the Lord into it makes it even stronger. As the Lord lives, and as you live, I will never leave you or abandon you. And they stick together, and he will not let him go. And as I was reading that in Youth University days, this repeated verse, this imploration, this insistence, used to come back to my heart and saying, this is actually how it should be. If the Lord gives us on this journey unto glory a soul friend, the journey is less lonely. If there's someone there who will always be there and can say this, I will never leave you or abandon you, and clings and clings and clings, that is a precious boon. It can happen through marriage, but alas, it can unhappen also in marriage, and we're seeing that. We see people who gamble and give all, and down the line find that there's stuff going on, either in the privacy of a person's room, e.g. on internet, or worse, which is actually taking away the very heart of that gamble and trust, which is given all, forever, and God involved at the altar. And it's happening an awful lot. There's an awful lot of loneliness in marriage. But then there are other ways in which can happen too. We don't have in life usually all that many people that we can really unload onto and share everything with. If we have one, it's a fantastic blessing. It's not good really to put one's heart on one's sleeve all the time and have too many, but it's good to have one. And then it's also a safeguard. How many suicides could have been avoided if there was one who picked up the signals? Now that brings me into another question. It's how much should one say to that one? Concretely, people sometimes come to you in the realm of confession and bring up a question of what should they not say? Is it a sin, for instance, to say things which could be classed as gossip? Well, the answer is not simple. There's an expression, is there not, a need-to-know basis. Now, it can be necessary on that need-to-know basis for the safeguard of the balance of some souls, sometimes to, as it were, to talk to their better half, their soul friend, their anamchara, about all that's going on, which might therefore involve revealing certain facts. But the intentionality enters into it there. The intention is not to gossip or defame, it's to get help. So it's quite different. And something of that also enters into a good marriage, where a husband or a wife knows all. In fact, in a good marriage, a good relationship, the girl might say to the boy, "You're an open book to me. Do you think you can hide anything from me?" And it happens after a while, intuition. They pick up. So that's a great boon. Now, having said that, therefore go into the other realm of gratuitous colporting of perhaps truths, but bad information, is a different business altogether, and is not without sin when it's purely gratuitous and even malicious. There's no need for that. That's not a need-to-know basis at all. That's just entertainment at someone else's cost. And that's out there. With regard to the gospel, it's a glorious gospel but hard to live. Purity of intention. Teresa of Avila used to insist that the absence of purity of intention was the catastrophe in much good. Self-respect, doing things for the wrong motive. The Lord here 3 times, 3 different examples, shows how in good deeds, almsgiving, in prayer and in fasting, if we do not need the glory of men, it's quite different. We as priests become aware after a while of where the real hidden gems are, and they're precisely those who do these things without any glory. It might simply be suffering without the glory of letting other people know that we're heroes in suffering. It might also be, as in the case of John Henry Newman, what was discovered after his death, the number of bills to doctors and the like that he himself in a hidden way had paid for the poor people of Birmingham. It might also be something quite unspectacular but very pleasing to the Lord, such as the ministry of listening even for a long time without the slightest sign of impatience or the slightest interruption to a person who actually perhaps is quite tiring. It's not glorious, but it's hugely meritorious, and life is made all the time of that kind of thing. E.g., the unglorious but very important ministry of the way we interact and show whether a person there in front of us at that moment is important or not, or to be dismissed, to pick it up straight away. It's a hidden sanctity, but it's concrete. And they're the little things which can lead to great glory. I just conclude. Elijah is looked back to by the great family of Carmel. We know that this particular family has maintained many links with heaven in the mystic world over the centuries, and is still there. Why should it be surprising if you get especially women spending their whole life loving and gazing, waiting and watching, and doing penance to boot? Well, one of the most recent Carmelite saints to be canonized is Miriam, Marie de Jésus Crucifié, little Lebanese illiterate nun who died at the age of 32, stigmatized with all the gifts and more, and had something similar to Elijah with regard to takeoff. She would just go up and up and up physically. And she was very obedient, because if the Mother Superior just intimated a command, she'd immediately come down from the tree where she would be taken up. Only once was she so absorbed in the ecstasy that when the command came to come down, she had a tiny fraction of a second of hesitation because she was so ecstatically gazing at Jesus, and she said this, once the ecstasy had been taken away immediately from her, because of that slight moment: L'agneau parti, je dois descendre par mes propres moyens. The lamb having gone away, I have to come down by my own means, and came down the tree with great difficulty. Well, she knew things, lots and lots of things. The Lord was the architect of the Carmel of Bethlehem through her. Physically, he showed what he wanted, and it's exactly as he wants it, but he also was the architect of the life in it. Did not want the human voice to be heard in it, in the places of what we call the lieux réguliers, the regular places, corridors and all the rest of it. Silence was the cushion in which he could be heard alone. He was also keen on correcting anything which wasn't according to the rule, therefore he honours the rule. And there are instances of that happening. But then there's more. She knew where this and that sister ended up after death pretty quickly. And there are cases which are puzzling, like officially a holy Mother Superior who was having a rough time after death, and she knew why. Things like having, as it were, appropriated or used money as though it were hers and not that of the community, that kind of thing going on here or there. I don't know which monastery it was. And also the contrary. Whereas purgatory was extremely demanding for those who had not conformed themselves to the graces of the state, by even minimal things apparently, there was one big surprise which puzzled everyone who heard it. It was that of a very hidden, notice, a very hidden, ordinary nun who did nothing at all ever spectacular, who went like a rocket. And apparently the reason was this: during the whole of her Carmelite life, she had never ever once lacked in charity. So this goes back to the gospel straight away. We can have lift-off like Elijah and like that holy nun, not with spectacular things, but with precisely the hidden gift of ourselves in